Welcome, everyone, to Childcare Crisis in South Dakota, a panel discussion hosted by South Dakota News Watch, the state's only independent nonprofit statewide journalism organization. I'm News Watch Content Director Bart Fancook, and I'll be moderating tonight's discussion that is the latest component of the ongoing South Dakota Matters series of community conversations and statewide polling efforts sponsored by News Watch. Childcare is getting harder to find in South Dakota and more expensive, placing heavy stress on working families, daycare providers, and employers who are facing a severe workforce shortage. Experts are calling it a crisis that could slow economic progress and job growth in the state and also restrict the ability of families to make a good living and pursue the American dream. A 2021 survey showed that in Sioux Falls alone, about 2,000 children of working parents do not have childcare spots available to them. And an estimated 4,000 parents in the city are not in the workforce, but could be if they had daycare available. The child care shortage is a national problem, but is particularly bad in South Dakota, where almost 75% of children under age 6 have both parents working. The daycare shortage is taking place in both urban and rural areas. Larger cities have seen a big drop in child care providers, both before and during the COVID-19 pandemic, which has worsened the child care shortage overall. Meanwhile, 7 rural South Dakota counties have no state-registered daycare providers, and several have only 1 or 2 small at-home providers. On South Dakota Indian reservations and in many Native American communities, the child care crisis is even more dire, making it nearly impossible for some Native parents to keep working or forcing them to make painful decisions about how and where to safely place their children during the workday. Governor Kristi Noem announced in her December 7th budget address that she's proposing to spend $100 million in one-time federal funds to jumpstart development of more daycare in the state. But that plan needs legislative approval and could take months or more to begin. In the meantime, the crisis continues. We have 4 expert panelists with us today to provide a wide-ranging look at the child care problem and also offer potential solutions from their unique perspectives. Our panelists tonight include Pigeon Big Crow, Director of the Oglala Sioux Tribe Child Care System on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation; Rich Mercouris, pastor of King of Glory Church, who also serves on the board of 2 Sioux Falls community organizations working to provide quality child care to working parents; Rachel Talish, a mother and businesswoman who operates a home-based daycare in Murdo, South Dakota, providing the only child care in all of Jones County; and Rebecca Wimmer, CEO of the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Sioux Empire, which runs a large nonprofit child care program. Thank you to all our panelists and to those viewing live or on tape. Viewers can submit questions for panelists by using the chat function on the Zoom meeting platform. I'd like to kick off the discussion tonight with Ms. Wimmer. As a community leader and a daycare provider, can you give us a brief overview of why Sioux Falls and South Dakota are facing such a big shortage of daycare options for working parents? And what are some of the basic factors causing the shortage?
Sure. Thank you very much for having us here this evening. In Sioux Falls, I think what we're primarily seeing is some of those worker shortage issues that are causing difficulty in being able to really hit capacity at our centers. For Boys and Girls Club in particular, and I know for many other childcare centers in Sioux Falls, we're having difficulty attracting and retaining employees. Some of that is due to the wages. Historically, childcare has been on the lower end of pay. And with that, as we're seeing some of those for-profit businesses, food service industries, things like that, increase their wages, childcare is having a difficult time keeping up, causing many of those in the childcare workforce to leave for other adventures. It's just been really difficult for us to be able to get enough staff into our buildings to be able to serve the number of kids that we have on wait lists.
Yeah, thank you. And Pastor Mercouris, I wonder if you can share a bit about how the daycare shortage is affecting working parents and families in Sioux Falls. What stresses are people dealing with, and what are some of the outcomes that you're seeing on the boards that you serve on?
Yeah, thanks for having the conversation this evening. I think we're seeing a couple of different things. One of the things we're seeing families faced with difficult decisions. Sometimes an infant room is closed at their child care center, and so the parent doesn't have any time off left because they probably use the majority of their PTO for COVID reasons or others. And so they're putting themselves in a difficult situation with their employer and having to make difficult decisions regarding employment. And so we're just seeing that different places all around the community. I think one of the other things that we're seeing across the community is families trying to find probably a different way to work. And so, for example, someone might say, hey, I might become an Uber driver in the evening rather than work the other hours, so I can kind of stay home with some of the kids during the day. The other parent can be at home during the evening. I think that's impacting some of our workforce availability for other sectors of the economy as well. And so parents are just getting into a spot where they have to ask the question, does the cost of childcare mean I should keep working, or should we rework what we do as a family?
Yeah, thank you. I know there's a lot of ripple effects. Ms. Big Crow, I thank you for being here. I wonder, can you give us an overview of what's happening on Pine Ridge, and some of the challenges you discussed that parents face there? I know you told me earlier that Head Start programs, early childhood development programs, are closed, and also tribal daycare spots that you run are also restricted. What's happening down on the reservation, and how is that affecting families?
Well, thanks, Bart, for having me this evening. Yeah, there are several challenges that we're having that are isolated to the reservation, and that primarily has to do with the COVID pandemic and the different types of regulations that we have here on the reservation. We're following the CDC guidelines as well as the tribal ordinances. And with the tribal ordinances, it really restricts a lot of the in-person activities. We currently have our Head Start program that is not in person. And so they do home-based, and they do some outreach with their food program. And a lot of the children are displaced because the early childhood, so that's 5 and under, are really have nowhere to go. They're stuck at home still. It's been almost 2 years now. They haven't been in a classroom. There's a lot of stresses for the parents, trying to figure out, should I go to work because I have no childcare for my younger children? No, older children, they kind of take care of themselves. They can go to the fridge and grab a snack, but our 3 to 5-year-olds aren't able to do that. So therefore, the parents are basically just choosing to stay home, choosing to not go to work, and a lot of them are not taking in the other children that are displaced also, simply because of the stricter guidelines. And we've had a lot more lockdowns here on the reservations that have affected the parents' ability to move about and to be mobile and go to work and take care of other children. So it's put a lot of stress on the workforce for childcare. Help is on the way. We see a lot of federal assistance starting to come about now, and it's hopefully going to be changing here pretty soon.
And a new facility opening in the coming year, is that right?
Yeah, we have one that is starting construction this March, and that one will hold 150 children a day. That will be right inside of Pine Ridge, and it's a STEAM center. So it's science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And that's for ages 12 years and under. And it's located on the same land as the Swambicro Boys and Girls Club. And so we're trying to get the wide range of children served. So the STEAM Center will serve children up to the age of 12, and then the SWAN Center will take them and from 13 on up to 19.
That's good news. There's some good news there. Thank you. Ms. Talish, I wonder if you can tell me about your unique role that you have there in Murdo and Jones County. What do you see from your perspective in terms of only being one provider there in a fairly large region? How aware are you, and how appreciative are parents that you're doing what you're doing?
I think parents are very appreciative. I feel really bad a lot of the time having to turn people away, say I don't have a spot for you. Unfortunately, we live in a ranching community, and there's a lot of people who want just a part-time spot. And so that also becomes, the income and making sure that I can provide the things and do things with kiddos that I want to do, whether it's activities if we have the time, or just spending time with them. I used to only take about 7 kiddos at a time, and I'm full with anywhere from 9 to 12 a day, because there is nowhere else for these guys to go. I think the good news is we have a new provider starting. She's moving to town. She's going to be starting next month, which is going to help a lot of our families. But a lot of these kids are being bused from family members to the older church ladies in our town will take kids, but they're also busy too. And I think that that's kind of worn them down a little bit too. And then parents just taking their kids to work. So it's been busy for all of them, and I stay extremely busy. So
I know you also run a bakery business too, and you
I
said
do.
60 to 80 hours a week, and on the phone, it was very busy in your household. I could hear that. Well, thank you
Always.
for sharing. I wonder, Ms. Wimmer, can daycare be made more affordable? Some of the data that I presented in my package showed how people in Sioux Falls, and I think across the state, are spending an outsized portion of their income on daycare in order to stay working. And I wonder, is there a way to make it more affordable in the current system?
No, I think, Bart, there probably is a way out there. I think if I had the answer as to what that was, we maybe wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. But I think if we're going to find a solution to this childcare crisis, it's going to have to be multifaceted. I don't think that there is one thing that is going to solve it necessarily. It's going to need to be a partnership between public and private sectors, the government, providers, in really looking at the totality of what is the childcare crisis, and then how do we start to piece things together to be able to solve some of those elements.
Can you give us a sense right now for what parents are facing, that decision point that they may come to in some cases?
Sure. At least for our organization, we recently had to do fee increases that was based off of pay increases that we've done for our staff in the last 12 months, just to stay somewhat competitive with the market here in Sioux Falls. There's really not another way to be able to afford to continue the business without raising some of those fees. And so as we do that, a lot of our parents do have to look at, like Rich said, is it still worth it for them to continue to work when a large portion of their paycheck is going to childcare? In South Dakota, we have a disproportionate amount of income that is being put into childcare from household incomes compared to what the national average is or should be. And so for parents simply looking at that, saying, what I'm bringing home in my paycheck, most of that is going to childcare, doesn't necessarily make sense. And that's where we may see some of those families deciding to pull out of the workforce.
Yeah, thank you. And Pastor Mercouris, I know you're working on this issue. I interviewed the Sioux Falls mayor for my stories, and he talked about the potential economic impacts. Do you have concerns for Sioux Falls or other large or small cities in South Dakota if this doesn't get fixed? That what could those impacts be? What might we see here as some long-term outcomes of this?
I think in Sioux Falls, we're seeing obviously a lot of new business come to Sioux Falls. Amazon is moving here, is the big one that everybody knows about, but others as well. But then you listen to the most recent address from the governor, and there's people moving to small communities across our state as well. And I think in order for them to be part of the workforce, there's got to be a healthy childcare environment for their children. And so if we can't, or if we are unable to provide that healthy childcare environment, our workforce is going to shrink. If our workforce shrinks, the new business that's been coming to South Dakota is going to have to relocate somewhere else. Business is going to go where they can find employees. I think we can all agree on that. And so we want to provide an opportunity for businesses to flourish. We're going to have to provide good, affordable, safe, and education-based childcare setting as well. I think one other key element in all of this is that it's not just about daycare. It's also about a healthy environment for the child. We want to raise the high school graduation rate in our state. One of the number one ways to do that is to send our kids to kindergarten ready to learn. If they're behind in kindergarten, oftentimes they fall behind and sometimes never catch up. And so quality daycare can help in that development of a child.
Yeah, thank you. I know it's important. And Newswatch will be examining some of the state test scores from the previous year, and not good. The pandemic has not been a positive factor for child learning. I wonder, Ms. Big Crow, if you can, we talked on the phone about, you mentioned generally some of the challenges people face, but in a remote area where there's, you said you didn't believe there was any privately operated daycare, almost all through tribal, or then the program you run where you are able to provide some funding and resources to individual families. Can you talk about the lengths that people go to if they want to keep a job, say, to keep their kids in a safe environment, not just any environment, but also a safe environment? You talked about long driving distances, and I think that's something that rural South Dakotans might have a good feel for, but perhaps some of our viewers who live in urban areas do not.
Yeah, well, I want to also talk about something Rich touched on too, and that's childcare attracting the job market. We've lost some of our medical staff locally because they didn't have adequate childcare, and people are moving in here, they don't know anybody. You know, it's a pretty tight knit area, and when you're coming in from the outside, you don't know anybody, you don't know where you can leave your kids, and if there's no space available in the centers, it's nearly impossible for people to find private childcare. There are no private childcare providers on the reservation right now. We do operate 5 state licensed centers, group homes. So those are 5 that can take up to 20 children at one time. And then we have the Baby Steam Center. The Baby Steam Center is a new endeavor that we've started. We started in February, and it ran for 6 weeks right before the pandemic. And then we had to shut down for a little while, and then we opened back up recently. And so the Baby Steam is a infant toddler program, and it takes children up to the age of 5 from 6 weeks to 5 years old. And that filled up right away. No, we've had children on the waiting list. You know, when they first find out they're pregnant, they start calling and want to get on the waiting list. We just don't have enough center-based care here. We've recently been able to increase our home providers from roughly around 62, 63. We're now at 103. So we've been able to attract some home care providers, but they're not the home care providers that will take children that they don't know or they're not comfortable with, or they don't know the family, and you know, the family histories go really far back in these tighter knit communities. And so if you haven't known a family for a long time, you know, it's just not really that easy for people to take other people's children into their home. And so we might have more home providers, but they're only watching one family or one child. So there's still a big disconnect between the children that need service and the children that are getting the service. And like I said, when I said help is on the way, and it really is, because at the federal level, we've seen a lot of funds come down for stabilization of the child care industry. And so I see that the state finally put out their application for child care stabilization funds. The Oglala tribe, our tribe, is a couple of weeks away from putting ours out public and open for applications. And I'm not sure what the state amount is, but the tribal amount is $10 million. So they are putting money into the industry locally. So that's been really helpful.
Well, you're certainly fighting the good fight down there, so good on you for that. I wanted to ask Ms. Tailish, a couple of our commenters here are wondering about how parents are able to find out where there might be openings. I'm sure I can share with our viewers how I found you. Was I called the Pilot gas station in Murdo and just asked about daycare, and they said, well, there's one lady and she's doing it. But some people from Sioux Falls have wondered, is there a way to get out the word? Well, first of all, how do people find you? And that process of say I want to move to Murdo, I get a job at the car dealership or a bank there.
Right.
What do I do?
So there's a Jones County community online bulletin board. And when I have an opening, I usually post there if I don't have anybody on my wait list. But because we are such a small community, your name gets out there. And there's a lot of families who appreciate having their kiddos in my care. So it's nice to have that word of mouth and friends. For a while, I think all my families were nurses that worked in communities, but the people who come to my daycare, a lot of them work 60 miles away, whether it be in Phillip or up in Pierre. I have people that come from Draper. So it's definitely word of mouth. And just talking. It's a small community. Everybody knows everybody.
Yeah. I know I heard on the phone, it sounded like you also take infants. I know that there's a concern about the youngest children of working parents. What's that like for you? And how important is that, because they could be younger in their relationship, maybe not making as much money at that time in their life, but what's that like to care for an infant, someone else's infant, and how important is that to what you do?
I think it's super important. So I actually was state licensed, and a bunch of my moms became pregnant around the same time, within about 9 months of each other. And I asked the state for kind of some leeway, whether, I could still be licensed, but have 3 under 1, and they weren't okay with that. So I ended up just letting my license go. I currently have a baby who turns 1 year this month, and then I have 2 littles that are 6 months old. So it's busy. It's all about making sure. So I actually have a baby area set up with a gate. And so it's always, I have a very strict routine. With all of my kiddos, we do the same things every day to make everything so much easier, not only for myself, but on them, because I want them to always know what's coming about. I was a teacher in a past life. And so I think that that's really important, to make sure there's a lot of structure. And I only have around 8 kids until about 12 o'clock, when the preschool bus drops off the rest of my kiddos. And then I fill up after lunch.
I know, talking to the parent I spoke to, you're somewhat of a hero in Murdo. So thank you for what you do. Ms. Wimmer, we also had a question about how the challenges with daycare can affect single parents or parents of disabled children or children with some kind of health issues. I wonder if you can speak to the unique needs of a single parent, and how is there help out there? Are they able to get that?
I think it's difficult anytime that you're a single parent and you're trying to do all of those duties on your own. Just seeking out the services, looking for, whether it's childcare, whether it's assistance with other things, having to do that on your own can be a lot more difficult. So absolutely, I think those families struggle a little bit more. And then I did see Carla Miller's comment pop up about, some of the kids with special needs, and how do you handle that? I will say that, that is one of the biggest concerns of mine right now is, how we're handling kids with special needs. We're getting phone calls pretty regularly, even kids with diabetes that aren't being allowed to be in childcare centers because of the liability of administering the medication. Kids that may have developmental needs, kids with behavioral needs that are being removed from whether it's in-home providers, center providers, because of their behaviors. All of that is extremely difficult on a child when they're moving from one site to the other, and we're just not providing environments. Lots of times when those kids are removed from, say a typical childcare center, there are very few options for them, and the options that are out there tend to be more costly than what regular childcare is, and there's not a lot of financial help for that. So definitely those kids that are in those special needs categories, whether medically, behaviorally, developmentally, as well as single parents, are going to have a larger struggle in just trying to be able to find that quality care.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that. Pastor Mercouris, I see you're actually doing childcare as we have our discussion, and so thank you for doing that. But in our conversation, you talked about what you called a group of gap parents, or people in the gap, and I wonder if you can relay to our audience what you mean by that, and how that affects what is a large portion of our middle to medium income families. That's really if you look at our wage structure in South Dakota, that's a very common wage ranges. We have a fairly sizable middle class, and I wonder if you could speak to those gap families and what you meant by that, and if there's any thing we can do to help those people.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. In the state of South Dakota, we've got state child care assistants which does a nice job filling a need for low-income families, depending upon circumstance, and follows that child to different centers or homes, wherever that might be. But sometimes individuals or families make a little bit more money that disqualifies them from state child care assistance, but they don't make quite enough money to be able to pay market rate. So I call that a gap family, where they don't receive government assistance, but they're not quite ready to pay the market rate either. And so I think we're seeing that in Sioux Falls, especially as we see wages go up, which is a great thing, something we should celebrate, people the opportunity to make more money. And as they're making more money, maybe they're growing out of some of, or not growing, they're moving out of some of those ranges. But at the same time, as market rates go up, they're still not able to afford the market rate. And so we've got to find some unique ways to help those individuals as they're continuing to move forward in their careers, afford childcare at a market rate where it doesn't have to be subsidized ongoing, because subsidizing childcare ongoing that's a difficult hill to climb for all of us for a long period of time.
Yeah, thank you. And Ms. Big Crow, I wonder, we had talked about, well, I have seen, I mentioned the test scores for students in South Dakota in the past year, and they're down for Native American children as well. It sounds like there's a lot going on there to try to bring an educational element, a child development element. Is there a way to bring that into at-home daycare? Because I know with your tribal facilities, and you talked about STEAM and STEM, those are programs that are operating, but is there a way to bring more child development opportunities for children who are in at-home daycares and not in a center sort of environment?
Yeah, we've recently started a new initiative, and it's a school readiness program, but we have home visitors, and each home visitor is assigned a certain amount of providers. And it's that home visitor's responsibility to know the children that are in that home provider center, home provider, we call them home provider centers, but for our purpose, the home provider. So they know the children, and they individualize. Every Thursday, when the provider either picks up their check or drops off their timesheet with us, they're given a packet of either toys, learning supplies, art supplies, science supplies. That's a whole nother department. So the STEAM department actually makes sure that they have the science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, and our home visitors focus on the social, emotional, physical fitness of children, and the nutrition of the children. So our home providers work with each provider to make sure that the packets are individualized to each child, that the nutrition levels for each child are taken into account in the homes. Each provider has been given a bread machine, a blender, a little toaster oven, so that they can teach the children how to make more nutritious meals. The snack program has really revved up during the pandemic, because we know a lot of the children are at home a lot longer than, or at home care a lot longer now than, going to school half a day and then to the home care half a day. Whereas now they're basically in the homes for the majority of the day. So we've beefed up our snack program. We don't provide a meal program, but we do have a really good healthy snack program. So we're trying to make sure that the kids are healthy, and we push the nap times and the mind body holistic health of the children. So we have training in all of those areas. And with our training program, we've actually had to take a lot of our training in-house. And one of the things we require with our providers is to make sure every provider prior to serving children have food handlers training, CPR, infant child CPR, first aid, and what's the other one? Transportation. So knowing how to put in a car seat the right way. Childhood illnesses. What are some of the common childhood illness? How do we identify them? And we've recently had to step up our COVID training, so that every provider got a thermometer and some PPE, so that they could provide more safe services to the children that come into the homes. So a lot of our training as we pulled in-house, so that we can really make sure that our children are being cared for, and that the provider doesn't have to worry about, number one, where are they going to get the money? Like we've talked about earlier, the pay for our home providers is just not all that great. And, the market rate for the state is low, but on the reservation, it's even lower. So it's really been hard for our providers to be able to afford to take in children, feed them, and make sure that they have some learning supplies. So we've taken that upon ourselves to make sure that they have all the supplies that they're going to need prior to starting work with children. We have a lending library. They can come in and get books, get toys, request art supplies, and then our STEAM department takes over and just is dishing out toys left and right. And there are a lot of learning activities. So there's a lot of hands-on activities. And we partnered with the Steve Spangler Science in Colorado. So they provide a lot of our activities and do a lot of our training for our providers. So we're really thankful to them. Our crew in the STEAM team, with the STEAM team, they're awesome. They're constantly researching and trying to individualize the programs to the children. If we have a child that's interested in robotics, they're out there, they're researching robots, they're trying to put together the activities that the children are really into. We have given out things like skateboards, because skateboarding here in town has become a really big thing. A lot of the kids hang out at the skate park, so we send our staff down there to get to know them. Get them pulled in, who do you stay with during the day? We're trying to recruit, trying to use things like skateboarding, basketball, science, and music, math, to recruit a lot of our children. So we're recruiting our families really through the children, getting to know the child, and then saying, hey, who watches you during the day? Where do you go during the day? Here's an application, give this to your parent. So we've been out there trying to get in the communities and do a lot more recruitment so that we can reach more children.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Talish, you talked about, and I know this is an issue about people wanting to make daycare or caring for children a career, entering the field. It's a low pay. I know there's mask wearing, caring for your own children seems hard enough. Caring for someone else's, it may be a labor of love for some, but I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about what you feel you bring to the table, but moreover, what can be done to try to make this a more prestigious career where we can either create education programs or incentives for people to take up this job and do it not as a labor of love, but as a labor of love, but also as a job that they can make a living at and have good benefits.
Sure. So I have a teaching degree from SDSU, and I taught in the prison system at the women's prison for quite some time. And then after that, I did some social work through Children's Home Society, licensing foster and adoptive homes. And so I think I bring a lot of mindfulness, playfulness, those kinds of things, but it's a hard job. So, even today, it was a crazy day. And, and you have 12 kiddos in your home, and you have kiddos that aren't feeling well, who are getting sick. And then I have a 1.5-year-old who is very much a toddler. And so it's difficult. It's not an easy task. And I think it's when I look at a lot of the forums on Facebook for daycare teachers, it's high burnout. There's a lot of people who only make it a year or 2 years. It's difficult. And I used to teach mindfulness at the prison system and taught DBT. I was certified also in cognitive behavioral therapy, and there's some days that I still struggle. And so I know that it's hard. I think there has to be a lot of support. I am very fortunate to have a wonderful husband who, he comes home at lunchtime and I get to vent for a minute. But I couldn't imagine being a single mom and doing this, because he also helps me clean. I work probably 12 hours a day. I start an hour and a half before daycare starts, whether it's, finishing dishes from the night before, making sure the floors are clean, but everything has to be cleaned and sanitized all the time because we don't want to spread germs. However, kids are very awesome at spreading germs, even though you take all those precautions. I think it's important to have a system of support, a community support. You have to take some time off, even though you feel super guilty about it. You need to take vacations and just take me time, because my me time is actually doing my baking business. That's what makes me happy. But I think for a lot of providers, it's tough. I don't know for sure what the answer is. I wish I did. I do know that I don't see this myself as a long-term career. I want to go back and get my master's in social work. I used to do a lot of counseling, and I miss that aspect. And I kind of miss adult interaction a lot. When you're with kiddos all day, you need adult interaction. Sometimes I feel bad for my husband, but it would be nice to want to do this long term, but I do see myself, when my daughter goes to kindergarten, probably not pursuing this as a career full time. I did it mostly to be able to stay home with her and to raise her. So.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Ms. Wimmer, with governor's proposing $100 million in federal money. It's a one-time boost. I confirmed with the head of DSS. Do you see big changes coming from that? Can that get us over the hump, or do you see that as maybe a stabilizing force? I wonder where your mind is at in terms of how that program might work. The details right now aren't fully baked, but I wonder if how big of a move that is, and do you see that as something with long-term consequences?
Sure. I will say extremely grateful for the governor's support. And I do think that some of that one-time funding can certainly help stabilize things in the short term. I think if we're looking at long-term, though, we're going to need something that's a little more robust in terms of solutions. Like I said before, I think that's going to have to be multifaceted in terms of really solving the childcare crisis. This crisis isn't something new. It's been something that's been brewing. COVID has just exacerbated the situation. So it's not going to get fixed overnight, but that one-term funding can help prop things up while we really focus on what those long-term solutions could be.
I wanted to just stick with you. We also discussed the bottom line for daycare, for center provided care. Volunteers of America, you guys are working with them to try to smooth that situation over, but is that a sign of more things to come? And I wonder, what do we do to try to stabilize these facilities so they can be viable?
I would hope that it's a sign of more things to come in a positive way. You never want to see a childcare center close, but in working with Volunteers of America and Boys and Girls Club, deciding together that we could be a stronger organization if we combined our efforts, if we really looked at the efficiencies of our program and said, look, we can be more efficient and help keep our rates lower for families if we combine our two centers together. And I hope that trend continues, just in really looking at what makes up each of the childcare communities and how can we work together to better support one another. I saw, Pamela's comments come through on there, just talking about in-home providers. I cannot say enough about the importance of in-home providers, and we have seen a huge decline in the number of in-home providers in our state. Just like we're seeing some of the struggles in childcare, and it takes all providers to be able to support our communities and to support our state. So just making sure that whether it's center-based, whether it's in-home, that we think about how we can support one another. I love some of the stuff that Ms. Big Crow is talking about, the things that they're doing on the reservation and helping support all types of providers, whether those providers are doing it in the home or whether it's center-based. I think the more that we start to work together as a community and share resources and ideas, the stronger we're going to be.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you for sharing that. Pastor, in our conversation, you talked about and we haven't talked about it here, the role of employers. Employers need workers. employers are facing a changing some social norms about who works and how. I think we saw that it wasn't just people lazy sitting home taking extra unemployment benefits because we haven't seen this rush back to the workforce. You spoke of kind of the changing mores in employment and what people are looking for, work-life balance, those things. But also, if you read the story, I talked to a medium-sized South Dakota employer, and he said it really wasn't even on the table to provide any kind of childcare benefit. What do you think employers could do or are going to have to do here to step up and play a part in this equation in solving this problem for themselves and for working parents?
Great question, and I assume this is high on the mind of most business people in South Dakota. At the end of the day, employers all the time are putting together packages to attract the most talent possible. Every employer's putting together a healthcare package, a PTO package, special bonus structures, whatever it might be. Employers are trying to attract talent. I believe at the end of the day, the number one thing people are looking for right now is flexibility. I think that's been shown in a variety of studies that's a thing. But the other thing is people are going to desire some childcare benefit potentially that might be a way to attract really good talent to your company. What that looks like, I think there's a variety of different ways it could be played out. I don't think businesses want to get back in the childcare business. There's too much liability there. It takes a special niche of leadership, facility regulation, all of that. But employers could join together with other employers to form a co-op in a sense, or they could provide a benefit that allows them to receive childcare funds that maybe could be used at certain childcare facilities, in-home providers, et cetera. So I think employers at the end of the day are going to get creative in doing what they have to do to recruit talent. And I think one of the things to recruit talent, they're going to have to find some unique ways of providing potentially a childcare benefit.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah, I wanted to stick with you, Pastor. You are on the board of a childcare provider and also the Hope Coalition, which seeks to try to improve daycare options and the lives of children. Are public-private partnerships a real thing? They come up, that discussion comes up in my research. I saw, public-private partnerships recommended in both of the big reports that were done in South Dakota on the childcare crisis. Are those doable? Is the will there to do that? Is the will to spend the money? Do you have anything moving forward with either of your groups to try to create something like that? I wonder if you could speak to that.
That's a great question. A question that could get me in a lot of trouble depending upon how I answer it. We hear a lot of conversation around public-private partnership. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to this. We need the public entity involved and we need the private entity involved. How they relate to one another, I think there's a lot of work and conversation to be had there. There's no question we still need programs such as state child care assistance to move forward. I think where it gets really messy and there's still a lot of question is how, for example, the government and the private entities work together. Because anytime the government steps in, some private entities are going to back up a little bit. They'd rather have the market take care of itself. But the reality is the public is already involved in this space. The question is how much more to get involved and how to get involved that doesn't lower the engagement of the private sector as well. So it's a balancing act. I think in South Dakota, obviously, there's a variety of perspectives on the role of government and on the role of public involvement. But at the end of the day, I tell people this as well. There is a financial outcome if government's not involved. And so, for example, fiscal responsibility might be to get involved to prepare kids for kindergarten, because if we don't get involved, there might be some fiscal problems down the road with those children not graduating high school, et cetera. So sometimes fiscal responsibility actually is providing a program that allows that child to become a contributor in the years ahead, rather than paying that for it on the back end than on the front end. So there's a lot of conversation to be had there. I just think people need to come to the table and say, what's best for our community? Let's not do a one-size-fits approach across the whole state.
I wanted to say to all the panelists, my final question is going to be the unlimited budget crystal ball question. So do be thinking about your personal sort of vision for how this could all get solved. And so I'm going to come to that. We're going to wrap up with that as sort of our send off. But in the meantime, Ms. Big Crow, is there an opportunity for private daycare? Can that pencil out to where on a reservation in South Dakota, you could have a company come in rather than relying almost solely on government to fund that? Is that an option? Do you believe down in your part of the state?
I think it would be a really great option if that could be possible. The only problem we'd have here would be facilities. You know, somebody would have to have enough capital to be able to come in and construct here, because right now there's just not enough facilities in this area. And I'm sure a lot of our other more urban or rural areas in the state too might have the same issue with available facilities. So one thing we've done to be creative is to partner with Oglala Lakota County School and Little Wound School. So we'll be opening 2 centers in January, 1 in each school, because we partnered with the school. The one is a charter school, Little Wound is a charter school, and Oglala Lakota County is a county school. So we'll be opening daycare centers inside of the school to serve the teachers, because they were losing a lot of teachers because their teachers and their staff didn't have adequate childcare because they have the younger children. And with the Head Start shutting down, those children had nowhere to go. So the teachers were then deciding to just stay home or stay in the Zoom classrooms. And they wanted to go more in person and start serving children face to face. But the problem was they couldn't get enough teachers. So they reached out to us and asked us if we could assist them. So with some of our new funding, our stabilization funding, we were able to open centers for the school so that we benefit because we stabilize the market and we reach out and we can serve more children. They benefit because they can recruit more teachers and retain the teachers that they have. So I think the partnerships are really great here.
Yeah, I wonder briefly if you could just tell me how does Head Start occur in a virtual environment? I'm having a hard time. I know how difficult it was for students in K through 12 to go virtual. How can Head Start work in a virtual environment? Is there a parent still have to be home then with them?
Yeah, there does still have to be somebody home, and when the teachers come around, they come around once a week, honk the horn. The parents or the provider goes out, gets the packet of teaching supplies for the week and the snack packs for the week. And that's about as much as I know. I can't speak to it too much because I don't know a whole lot about it, but having one grandchild in Head Start, I know that's how it's worked for us.
I would stay tuned to South Dakota News Watch, sdnewswatch.org for more information about that Head Start shutdown, because I'm just absolutely fascinated, but also very concerned about that. I didn't know that until you told me that. Ms. Talish, I wonder, part of the governor's budget address was not just this funding for daycare, and that's going to take a couple of different forms, but could you see the benefit of something where there was maybe a technical, she also wants to improve technical education. Could you see a degree or something where maybe there's a 2-year degree? One of our commenters here is mentioning bringing back the in-home provider mentor program. Sounds like there's a lot of things that could be done to improve and expand in-home daycares. Could you see something like that working in South Dakota?
There is a program, I know the Right Turn in Pierre had, it was called a CDA, a child care, oh gosh, I'm not sure.
Developmental associate.
Yes, right. And it was a program that they did in the evening. So a lot of the providers in town would go during their evening hours, and it was pretty beneficial. I'm not sure if they still have that program. I used to be friends with Barb Rohrbach, or there was a Barb that ran it, and she did excellent work. She was very dedicated to these providers. She provided a lot of help. I do think it's beneficial, but then on the other end, you spend a year or two in college to get paid $12 to $13 an hour. And I don't know that there's a huge benefit at that. I marketed myself when I first did this as I was a licensed teacher. I was a licensed social worker. I have a background in cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and I was able to market myself that way. But yet I took a pretty large pay cut when I first started doing this business. And I didn't do it for the money, but I did it to be able to stay home with my child. And fortunately, my husband has a really good job, but I can't imagine, going to college for 2 years to make $12 an hour, where I can go to McDonald's in Pierre and work for $15 an hour, or I have friends that bus tables and they're making $30 to $40 an hour. That just doesn't make sense to me. So I don't know how much, I really enjoy doing childcare and I really love my kids like they're my own. But at what point do you say, I'm not going to be able to make ends meet by doing this as a job? I did know at the school board meeting on Monday night, we talked about how there's going to be money available. When I ran numbers to look at opening a center in our town, the building that was available was $175,000. And I would need to do a minimum of $25,000 to be able to get that up to standards with urinals, bathrooms, buying supplies. It made 0 sense for me to open a center in my small town. Do we need it? Absolutely. It's not feasible. I'd be taking home less money than I'm making now. And then I lose all the tax deductions on my home. That's how I make ends meet every year. And so I don't know, there has to be something that helps, but I don't know if we shove a whole bunch of money at something, is it going to serve it long term? I think it serves it right now and it fixes the problem now. But what do you do in 10 years when the center can't stay open any longer because they don't have the funds? And so I think that that's a discussion that also needs to be had.
I'm going to stick with you real quick here. So you were a state registered daycare, and so our viewers know it's voluntary to register with the state if you have 12 children or less in an at-home daycare. Registering does bring in regulation and inspection, and I think overall it's probably seen as a good thing. South Dakota has liberal laws in that regard. Why did you decide not to, and I don't think there's any question from what you've said that you do a great job and you care deeply. So it's not a question of that, but I wonder why you decided to voluntarily register.
Sure. So I can only have 2 infants at a time, and that just didn't fit with me wanting to keep the families that I had already established in my daycare. And then having a bunch of babies, I actually had to let a family go because I knew I couldn't care for 4 infants at once. So, that was just something that had to occur. I think the paperwork is crazy. I had one family that was behind on their vaccinations because the kiddos were sick every month, which happens a lot. When kids are under 2, they're sick pretty often. And so they weren't up to date on their vaccinations, and I was written up for it. And so I actually had to suspend care until those vaccinations were completed. And I think, I'm I want the kids to be healthy and those types of things. But I think that it's important to also provide love and a caring environment, but it's a lot of extra work. And then you have the food program coming in, 3 or 4 times a year. And the money was great, but I raised my prices $5 a week and was able to cover that extra expense that I wasn't receiving from the food program. Do I think that the state has a great program? Absolutely. I think DSS is great to work with when it comes to childcare. I always had a wonderful experience with the people that came into my home, and they always answered my questions well. I just didn't think that doing that was beneficial for me. I thought it caused more stress than good in the end.
Yeah, thank you for your honesty. I appreciate that. Ms. Wimmer, I know I've been told you're changing jobs soon, a new frontier for you and the Sioux Falls School District. We haven't talked about schools much. I wonder if you can tell me what you anticipate, not necessarily about your new role, but maybe part of that. But can the schools play a larger role here? I know Mayor Tenhaken talked about expanding the role of community centers in Sioux Falls to try to take on more of a daycare role. What do you expect we should look forward to with you? And is there a larger role for the public schools to play?
I think schools are an opportunity. The kids are in school a set number of hours, and it's those after school times where we see some of those poor choices maybe getting made, especially as they hit those middle school, high school age groups. And so I think the schools do have an opportunity to continue to provide environments for kids after school hours. just like we as a community have, I believe, an obligation to look at all the different ways that we can care for our kids, those kids that are kindergarten through 12th grade. How do we provide them opportunities to continue to develop and to have experiences that are going to help them be productive citizens as they enter adulthood? And so entering my new role, that is a focus, is how do we make that after school time meaningful for our kids, whether that is at the school, whether that's at community centers, whether that's at, you know, the neighbor down the street. How do we make sure that kids are getting, first of all, the safety that they need in those after school hours? And then how do we make sure that they're getting their needs met and able to continue to develop? There's a lot of research out there that talks about that, the impact those after school hours can have on children, and particularly children that maybe come from more difficult backgrounds. And when they are in after school environments, the significant growth that they're able to see when they're in a stimulating environment with caring adults. And so I think that can be, like I said, provided in the after school space within schools or in other opportunities throughout the community.
So we're at our last 3 or 4 minutes here, and it sounds like you came to kind of a nice topper there to our conversation. But final thoughts from you: a magic bullet, blank checkbook, crystal ball. What final thoughts from you, Ms. Wimmer?
Sure. You know, there's a couple of things that I focus on, and one of them is access for all of our children. You know, childcare, a lot of times you will see those families that have the means to afford high quality childcare are able to do that for their children. But those families, like Rich talked about, that fall in the gap, or maybe those families that struggle to find services, like Carla pointed out, those that have, you know, differing disabilities or challenges. We need to make sure that childcare is able to be accessed by all children, and also that the childcare is quality. Whether that is in-home childcare, whether that's center-based, whether it's group home-based, making sure that our children are getting the foundation that they need to be successful long-term. Whether there's a silver bullet to make those things happen, I haven't found it yet. But I do think that conversation is the first part of that, sitting around and having conversations about what we can do for our kids, dreaming together as a community as to how we can make things better is that first step in finding a solution.
Ms. Big Crow, your final thoughts on tonight's discussion?
I'm just really glad we're finally having the discussion and we're putting the issues out there, and hopefully, you know, some of our listeners have some solutions in mind and they can share some of those solutions with us, and, you know, give some input when the state does reach out to do their market rate survey, or when they reach out to do their new state plan, that some of the people listening and some of us can make some recommendations to the state to better serve the needs.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Pastor, final thoughts on tonight's conversation, or where we go as where Sioux Falls goes as a city? You may have an interest in that. And where do we go as a state on this issue?
Thanks for having the conversation tonight. I think number one is having the conversation and coming and saying, hey, let's be open and converse. There's not one silver bullet. It's been pointed out multiple times. If we come to the table with the mindset there is one silver bullet, that ends the discussion right there. And so we need leaders to come that way. I think 2 practical things, though. Number one is I would appreciate if the state would take a second look at refining the state child care assistance program. I think there's some review that needs to be done there, specifically in the area of child support and how our state handles that issue and how that relates to state child care assistance. I think some good work could be done there that would really help single moms specifically and those children. The other thing I would say very practically is we have got to keep an open door for in-home and center-based childcare. We cannot shut either one out. My children got 3 kids, all have been in an in-home daycare, and we've used them for all of our children up through age 5, and I would not do anything different. At the exact same time, I serve on the board of a child care center, and I love it and think it's extremely important. We need to make sure that we're providing regulation and functional government oversight that works for both settings.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sure you're almost ready to call it a day, Ms. Tallis. You probably, it sounds like I've had a long day, but your final thoughts on this topic and maybe one suggestion for how to improve things in a rapid way.
So I think, especially in small communities, really just having that conversation about how to come together. I know even our school board is saying, okay, so if things were to change, how can we go forward and, promoting a daycare. But I think it's important to just do whatever we can to encourage people who are thinking about it, reach out to somebody who does provide daycare. There's a lot of great resources in our small communities to help people get started. We have a community foundation that helps provide money for people to get started in providing grants. And I think, just reaching out, if you become state licensed, you can qualify for grants to be able to get those things that you need. But also looking at how can we provide support to those providers who aren't registered, who aren't licensed, and how can we help them to maintain and be good providers, whether that's teaching them literature classes or reaching out to them, or even saying to the state, we don't have a lot of licensed providers, but can we help some of these parents pay for daycare expenses? Because I think in our small community, that's one thing that really stinks. We're one of the poorest counties in the nation. We're not far from Pine Ridge, and we have a lot of families who are impoverished and need help paying for daycare expenses. And that means maybe unlicensed people. We can run background checks on those people and make sure that those homes are good, but really keeping those options open. How can we help everyone and not just, those that are regulated?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all the panelists for everything you're doing on this topic, for making time to speak with me for my article, and also for making time for this conversation tonight. I think it was super worthwhile and highly valuable. And I wish all our viewers I would encourage you to continue to follow South Dakota News Watch at sdnewswatch.org. I would wish everyone a terrific evening and a happy holidays. And that concludes our panel discussion for tonight. Thank you.